Stephon Castle is one of the most intriguing prospects in the 2024 NBA draft. This is floor and ceiling, let's break him down. Stephon Castle's entire game right now is really built around the question of feel. As we're about to break down, Castle doesn't really love to space outside the three-point line, which is sort of an anomaly in today's basketball. It's also the biggest reason as to why I don't see him as a guard full-time. Castle is not necessarily comfortable yet from the perimeter with the ball in his hands. At this stage, I prefer to see him as more of a connective, but very skilled wing. The UConn prospect can often disregard spacing, and he really wants to get into the paint. The danger of this is that it can become a bit predictable when teams figure out that he does not want to shoot most of the time. Already, defenses go under on him and sag off knowing that he won't pull up. However, Castle is savvy enough to make other things happen, although we should factor in that his non-shooting can condition entire team possessions sometimes. Still, Castle is great at recognizing the open gaps that exist around the court, and then he's strong and skilled enough to finish at the rim. The UConn Playmaker is a powerful athlete who's listed at 6'6" with a 6'9" wingspan. Even though he's not exactly quick off his feet, he's very fluid for being so compact. Right now, Castle is at 17 dunks for the season while shooting 60% at the rim. This is improvable, but it also shows enough upside to hold my interest. It's Castle's shooting that I have more concerns about. A lot of the time, it honestly feels like he would rather do anything on the floor but take a jumper. This is not unseen. At this stage of their development, the likes of the Thompson twins, Scottie Barnes, or Ben Simmons come to mind from recent memory. But in my opinion, they were all completely different athletes to Castle, and they also played with the ball in their hands a little bit more. Right now, Castle is shooting about 26% from 3. In his freshman year, he's at 17 makes for 65 attempts, which is less than 1 3 a game. Looking ahead towards the NBA, teams cannot count on him off the dribble or even just spotting up, so when Castle is left to catch and shoot, those closeouts will be really low urgency. Right now, they already are, because even beyond the numbers, which are discouraging in terms of volume and conversion, it's also Castle's willingness to take these shots that will need a reset. Like I've been saying, defenses are already daring him to shoot, and they're not going to guard Castle out to the three-point line because he's not making them pay. It's still early enough in his career, and like I'm about to break down, I don't think that Castle is a lost case, but the shooting question is most definitely going to need to be addressed. The good news is I expect that it will. Castle showed way more as a three-point shooter in high school, and even though he was still hesitant to an extent back then, even now I think that his form and his touch look better than some of those player examples that I just mentioned. Castle is way more fluid than the Thompson twins from 3, and going back to Ben Simmons, he did take jumpers in college, but unlike Castle, they were not threes. Even though the Huskies prospect is not exactly functional from the three-point line, he is not a total non-shooter. When it comes to late clock situations, for example, he plays much less hesitantly. Even though less than 1 goes in, I do like that Castle is at 2 threes taken per game. But for the entirety of his career, this might be his swing skill that we're looking at. So it's only fair to ask, how does Castle average 11 points per game? Well, it's a combination of his shrewd off-ball movement, his strength-based athleticism, and his power in short distances. Castle has improvement areas, but he is appealing largely because of how he consistently finds ways to influence games despite them. The UConn connector prefers to operate from inside the three-point line, where he can get snug ball screens and operate out of shorter drives. Castle is physical with how he gets to 2 feet and plays through contact. Off the catch, he's aggressive, so even when defenders sag off of him from deep, Castle will invite himself into the lane that they have given him. The 19-year-old is a crafty and creative finisher, and it's easy to see a path towards even more development at the rim. Castle will have to keep getting stronger, work on his handle, and hopefully he'll range out his area of impact to outside the arc. After all, spacing the floor as much as possible is a priority in today's NBA, and that is not one of Castle's strengths. But we did see a comparable prospect in Anthony Black be the 6th pick in a stronger draft. In that same mold as the Orlando Magic playmaker, Castle can also impact the game in transition. He creates events in the open court with his athleticism and two-way instincts. The 6'6" Castle can play above the rim and catch lobs. For me, I'm picturing him as a 2 or a 3 at the next level. I'm not sure that he ever becomes a primary initiator, but there is definitely value in what he brings to the table. Other than scoring, Castle can also facilitate. He sees over the top of defenses at his size, and he's a connective playmaker with the reads that he makes. Nowadays, the NBA is all about guys who can grab and go, so this is very scalable. And you could also see this translating to Castle's face-up scoring and driving game down the line. However, this would probably only come once his handle becomes more dynamic and compact. It's not there quite yet. In general, I like the flashes that we've seen from Castle as a facilitator. First of all, it's important to note that he has a very nice assist to turnover ratio. Castle is averaging about 3 assists to 1.5 turnovers per game. He makes quick decisions from a variety of spots, and he's pretty dependable with how he sees the floor. UConn has been using him from the elbow or the post, and Castle is consistently putting pressure on defenses with his size and how he makes them rotate. Again, even though you might be tempted to sag off of Castle because of his non-shooting, he sees over defenses and he can drive to the rim, so he cannot be afforded too much space. He's accurate with his deliveries in the half court and in transition, but also he's not just making easier reads all the time. For instance, we've seen Castle throw around some skip passes that are more complicated. Now, one could argue that Castle has not proven that he's great at any one thing. Plus, everything that we've just mentioned arguably comes on low volume, but I think it's interesting enough. And I think that this skill set usually tends to garner interest from NBA teams high up their draft boards, usually around the top 10. Of course, the worry is that Castle never develops any sustainable self-creation. This might not be an issue for his first few years in the NBA, but it eventually might catch up to him when he becomes a real focus on what other teams do. We've seen this happen recently with a comparable prospect like Josh Giddey, and this sort of do-it-all, wing-sized playmaker who's a non-shooter type has definitely been kept off the floor at times. This prospect comes with a lot of advantages, but it's a certainty that Castle will gradually need to become more of a scorer. Castle is going to need to get more comfortable creating away from the basket, and especially off the dribble. I've seen some comparisons be drawn to Jimmy Butler, but I would warn that their development path, until now at least, was totally different. I also have a few concerns about his finishing. Like I said earlier, he's at a good mark, but not at a great one at the basket. I can see that improving, but I also find it challenging because Castle only seems like a good, but not a great athlete. He moves really well and he has strong positional size at 6'6", especially if you're someone who sees him as more of a guard, but he is neither very bouncy or very long. Castle struggles to finish over length, and he lacks explosiveness in traffic, particularly with his left hand. As I've been pointing out, the UConn prospect prefers to really start inside of the three-point line, and relative to NBA standards, this will affect a team's spacing. Castle's in-between game is not overly existent, and he's limited with his resources to finish right now, so there might be somewhat of a clash when he first comes into the league. Given that he's not a top tier type of athlete, I'm not sure yet how he's going to do against more size at the rim and versus helps. At this stage, he's not a versatile slasher. Still, I can see some strength gains and handle improvements getting this to a better point. But for now, Castle is a little bit problematic off the bounce, and he's definitely unproven as a half-court playmaker. There's a big element of projection with Castle as a prospect, but I'm willing to bet on the overall package. Right now, as a college freshman, Castle is already a very solid all-around player who fits what NBA teams like high up the draft. He's a lengthy, connective, two-way playmaker who puts the ball in the hoop even if it is somewhat unconventional. However, he also brings other skills to the table, such as his rebounding. Castle is averaging about 5 rebounds a game, and he's pitching in on both ends. These are the sorts of things that should help the UConn prospect stay on the court early on in his career, especially while the rest of his scoring hopefully continues to round out. I've really enjoyed Stephon Castle's year on defense. Again, the UConn prospect is just an absolute playmaker on this end of the floor. He gets blocks and steals, not in massive quantities just yet, but enough to see some big upside there down the line. Castle moves and flips his hips really well in space. He cuts off drives and navigates screens well, and I really like how he uses his length on defense. Castle keeps his man in front, and he contests without getting into foul trouble, and he definitely makes the most of his size. UConn has been putting real defensive responsibility on him across positions, and he has responded accordingly for the most part. In the NBA, whenever he's at his best, I expect him to be switchable 1 through 3. Castle has the fluidity and motor to keep up with guards, and with his length and size, he will definitely be able to check wings. However, I do think he might end up just being a little too small to guard 4s. As a first-year college player, Castle was already impactful, and although this doesn't mean that it will directly translate as a rookie, after all, Castle will need patience, I do see a lot of potential on defense for him. Broadly speaking, I like the reads that Castle makes, but it's true that the technique isn't always there right now to execute. He can pick up some avoidable fouls just reaching in at the wrong moment, being overly physical, or having too much activity with his hands. As I've been stressing, and I don't have too many concerns about this, I think Castle projects really well on this end of the floor. But if there was to be a knock on him, it's that he's not that productive just yet, with under 1 block and under 1 steal a game. Stephon Castle has cracked into the top 10 of my big board. He brings a lot of skills to the table which NBA teams tend to appreciate, with his off-ball scoring, connective skills, flashes of dribbling, passing and shooting, and of course, his really good positional size and length. Looking ahead though, Castle will need to be more productive off the ball on defense, on the ball on offense, and hopefully he will become a really good, high-value two-way player. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like. Make sure to leave a comment telling me what you think of Stephon Castle. And if you enjoy the channel, if you want to watch more content like this, make sure to subscribe. Take care, and I'll catch you guys next time.